The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio with Dr. Alex Heublein and Dr. Josh Klapow. This is Adapt or Perish.
Hey, this is Dr. Josh, and joining me is Dr. Alex Heublein, president of Adaptigent, and we have another Adapt or Perish show for you. And man, this one's going to be awesome because, Alex, this is so down up my area. This is so what I do, even though the show is about you and your technology. Because this is all about this crazy, this crazy ass upside down world that we're living in right now. And one of the things that I have seen is when you take all the rules and you change them, and you don't have anything set. And, you know, frankly, right, that's what this pandemic has done. It's created all of these sort of, we've said it, unprecedented situations. I know as individual human beings, most people they're paralyzed, right? They're clinging to anything that feels normal. They're clinging to anything that feels, to be honest with you, anything that feels safe. Because they're worried, what's my next step going to be? And I think this pandemic has really done that because it wasn't just that it lasted 2 weeks or 2 months or a year. And it wasn't just that it changed certain things, in one part of the country, one part of the world. We got everybody going, okay, what is going to happen next? So, I can't even wrap my head around how that affects business in terms of its functioning, other than the terrible stories we've seen, which are supply chain distribution issues, logistics, et cetera, et cetera. So enlighten me.
Yeah, well, I think we're living in a world, and I think this is probably true to some extent with every generation of people, every decade. You're always going to be dealing with some level of uncertainty in the business world, in your personal life, whatever. So there's the old saying that change really is the only constant in life. But I think if we look at the last 20 years in particular, things have gotten much less. They've just gotten a lot more. What's the right way of putting it? A lot more uncertain. Mm-hmm. And I think the pandemic really has highlighted this high degree of uncertainty. But you've seen a lot of trends happen. You've seen globalization. That sort of was a big trend back in the 80s and 90s. We started seeing this globalization of business, whereas businesses before, they were much more regionally focused, or they were much more focused on a single country or a single region or what have you. And then you saw this massive expansion into globalization, where you've got these big multinational companies that are out there now, and the labor and the resources and innovations that were happening out in the world weren't just localized; they were out. They were globalized. They were out there in the global market. And so I think that a lot of factors like those have added to this degree of uncertainty that businesses face going forward. The world has gotten, to sum it up, it's gotten a lot less predictable than it was, say, 50 years ago or even 100 years ago. Back then you had to worry about certain things, but now there are many, many different things happening. And I think the pandemic really highlighted a lot of this. And I think a lot of companies realized, wow, we're not ready to adapt to big changes. We're optimized for adapting to really small changes. But when big changes come around, I think a lot of companies found out, particularly bigger companies, they found out that they were very, very ill-equipped to deal with this world of uncertainty. And they didn't really have any good ways of adapting to it. And a lot of them went out of business.
Right.
You look at the retailers that went out of business. There were airlines that went out of business, cruise lines, hotel chains. So they didn't prepare themselves adequately for a big change. And I think that's just part of human nature. We don't think in really long time frames, and we don't think about unlikely events. But what's interesting is that unlikely events do happen. Somebody wins the lottery almost every week, or somebody wins the Powerball on a regular basis. It's a very unlikely thing to happen, but it happens with great regularity. Yes. And I think that's what organizations have to realize, is that you can say, well, there's only a 1 in 1,000 chance of that happening. But yeah, you know what? It will happen eventually. And there aren't just one thing there aren't just a single thing that has a 1 in 1,000 chance of happening or 1 in 100 chance of happening. There are many things that have those probabilities that could disrupt your business. So I think companies have come to realize over the last couple of years, wow, we have to get a lot better at adapting not just to small changes in the market, but to these big disruptive changes that happen as well.
So that's really interesting because it again, the parallel at the individual human level is uncanny. We think about the bad things, the tornadoes, the earthquakes, et cetera. And we think, okay, that's not going to happen to me. It could happen, but it's not going to happen to us. It hasn't happened this far. Thus far. We've been fine. There's no need. I was just thinking there's no need for us to change our lifestyle or anything just because, a tornado might come and hit us, because these, like you said, the little things happen a lot of little disruptions, a lot of little uncertainties, but the big thing, I wouldn't say nobody saw a pandemic coming. Those in infectious disease and epidemiology and public health. But how do you convince a company that we've got to prepare for something that may not happen, right? That we know that it's going to happen every day, but let me rephrase that. Something that's going to happen every day, but it may not happen to us. And in fact, most of the time, it's not going to happen to us.
Yeah, it's a tricky question, and there's been a lot of interesting research and a lot of there's some great books out there on this. One of them is I can't remember the author's name, but he wrote a book many years ago called The Black Swan.
Yes, is Malcolm? No, not Malcolm. Is it Malcolm?
No, I think it was Nicholas Taleb, maybe.
Yes.
It's a fantastic book, right? And it's all about this idea that these black swan events occur. Right. Like, and it came from this idea that, all that people had ever seen in the world were white swans. And so nobody ever thought a black swan could exist. But then, the first folks that showed up in Australia or wherever it was, they were like, whoa, there's black swans here. This is completely crazy. So it got to be known as this sort of black swan event thing. And that's really what that's really what it is. It's an event that is unlikely to happen and don't necessarily happen frequently, but they do happen with regularity over time. And so, how do you convince a company to take those things seriously? I mean, I think we've had a lot of help in that regard with the pandemic. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think if anything good came out of it, it was that it made organizations realize, look, these things actually do happen. It's been a long time since one did happen. But I think these black swan events are happening with greater regularity over time. And so I think the way to convince companies to do it is to really sit down and understand, how adaptable are you? And again, the most companies are adaptable to a certain level. They can handle a certain amount of change. And then when you get past that level of change, everything falls apart. Everybody's running around trying to figure out what the heck to do. And nobody has thought about it in advance of, okay, if this does happen, what are we going to do? It's kind of like, you buy homeowners insurance because you're afraid your house might burn down. Well, I don't even know anyone in my entire life that has ever had their house burned down. Like ever. Like, I don't even know how that happens.
I do. Yes, I do. But go ahead. Yes.
Well, except the guys that try to put the frozen turkey in the fryer in their garage or whatever. And I mean, you see those circumstances, right? But it's just not a very common occurrence. Yeah, every single one of us who owns a home just about has homeowners insurance because we're worried that maybe our house will burn down. But so one of the things that people did over time, though, is they said, look, have an evacuation plan for your family. If there is a fire, what are you going to do about it? We know it's unlikely, but look, it might be unlikely, but the downside to it, if it does happen and you're not prepared, is that, maybe you and your family don't make it out of the house. And so there's this unlikeliness factor multiplied by the I don't know what the best word for it is, but the consequences of that thing happening, right? Those tend to be, you multiply that out and it actually comes out to a pretty significant number.
No, right. Well, I mean, we talk about it in health all the time. We go talk about sort of the health belief model. And the idea is how likely do I believe that I will develop this condition or, develop this disease? And so that's one. And then two, which is exactly the same thing, how bad or what's the impact that I believe this disease will have on me? And then the third piece is, what do I need to do or what's required of me to not be in this potential situation? And right. And so people are weighing that and you get all kinds of fascinating psychological pretzels going on. I'm never going to develop that, even though you have.
I'm never going to get cancer. Or whatever.
It's exactly. Or what you get, and I think this one is more interesting because the pandemic kind of blew this thing up, and I see this with companies. It's not likely to hit us, but if it does, whatever the bad thing is, whatever it is, won't be that bad. Right? If there's a market change, it won't be that bad, and it won't be that bad for us, with almost this false belief that maybe that we can adapt, even though on paper, if Adaptigent came in, they're like, you would say, oh my God, y'all are not prepared at all. But it's almost like a defense mechanism that we'll be okay even if we're not. Do you see that a lot?
Yeah, I do. And I also see, I read an interesting article recently that was talking about, people that engage in behaviors that are detrimental to their health, and they know they're doing them, right? So you've got people that are maybe overweight because they're not on a diet, or you have smokers, or you have whatever, right? And the fascinating part of the article was that they found that people that engage in those behaviors, they don't see the future version of themselves as being themselves. They see it as another person entirely.
Yes.
So when they look at things and they say, well, I'm 40 years old now, they view their 70-year-old self as a completely different human being.
Right.
And so I think it's built into human nature. And I think companies get into that situation as well. And I think part of the challenge is that we've gone from a culture of business that was very long-term oriented. Just take the stock market, right? 50 years ago, people would buy stocks and they would get these physical paper certificates of their stocks or their bonds or whatever. They would put them in their safe deposit box. And generally speaking, they would leave them there for years or even decades. They were long-term investors. Almost everyone was a long-term investor at some point. And we've gotten now to this world where everything is very short-term. And you can buy and trade stocks online with your phone, and you can do it in a couple of seconds, and you get day traders and everything else. And so I think the time horizon that people have, but as well the time horizon that companies have, has shrunken down. And so they're not so much concerned about what could happen 10 years from now. They're worried about what will happen next quarter. And so I think that shift from a long-term mentality to a much shorter-term mentality drives a lot of this thinking that, well, I'm not going to worry about that happening because that's going to be a different company 10 years from now. So the same way individuals think, well, my 70-year-old self isn't actually me. That's some person who's in the future who isn't related to me at all. And so I think getting people to have a bit longer term focus and a little bit longer term mentality and getting companies to do that, that's one of the critical elements in dealing with this idea of dealing with an uncertain world and dealing with a world and operating in a world that doesn't really have a lot of precedence for it.
Do you think that one of the things that I've seen about particularly with the pandemic, or specifically with the pandemic, is the light got shined on everybody, every person, every family, every school district, business, that nothing was unscathed at some level. And so that, the natural tendency for us to go, well, it won't be that bad, or it won't hit me, or it won't, it became harder and harder. Actually, as we speak, it's becoming harder and harder because you're looking around and it's happening all around you. Has your experience been with Adaptigent and the companies that you're working, because of all this, that even the companies where they haven't been hit, Nothing has happened to them because they're seeing it with either competing companies or they're seeing it in industries that are, somewhat parallel. Has it created a desire to change, to adapt, to talk to you all, to make more phone calls to your company about, hey, maybe we really need to be thinking about this? Have you seen any change with the pandemic?
Oh, yeah, there's definitely been a change. I mean, and it goes back to, this idea that human beings in general just have this fallacy that they tend to weigh things more heavily that happen to them or people that they know firsthand than statistics. So, for instance, if you have a friend of yours who bought a Ford or a Toyota or whatever, and let's say it was a Toyota, and they had all kinds of mechanical problems with their Toyota, you're much less likely to buy a Toyota, even knowing that statistically they're some of the most reliable cars in the world, because you had this locality of reference. You had this thing happen that was closer to you, that wasn't just a statistic. You had this thing happen that was closer in time to you and closer in some kind of proximity, whether it's a friend or your neighbor or what have you. You will give that evidence much, much higher levels of credence than you will statistics based on millions of car owners. And I think that's true to some extent of corporations, because when you think about it, corporations are just collections of people for the most part. And so, you wouldn't expect anything to be different in corporations, right? They see things happen, and the things that happen that are closest to them or happen maybe in their industry, then they go, whoa, hang on now I've got to start taking this seriously. So I think with the pandemic in particular, that affected so many industries that I think at least temporarily people are saying, wow, yes, we do need to get more adaptable. We have to be able to react more quickly. And in fact, I heard, one of the commentators on the pandemic said, it's been a horrible pandemic, but this might be the pandemic that saves the human race. And they said, because now we have, at least for some period of time, we're going to take these sorts of things much more seriously. And if there's a pandemic that might break out that has a much, much higher death rate, a different pandemic 10 years from now, the hope is we will have learned how to adapt to these things more effectively. So I think you're seeing the same thing with companies. A lot of companies are looking at this saying, wow, this hit home, and it hit home from a corporate standpoint, from an earnings standpoint, from a personal standpoint. So people are very, very focused on right now, how do I make sure that I am able to adapt to these situations going forward? And I'll give you an example of this. I mean, we saw a lot of, back when the pandemic first hit last year, they put a lot of stimulus money. The government put a lot of stimulus money in the U.S. into people's hands to help them deal with the pandemic. And they boosted up unemployment claims. And what we found was that, like, these state unemployment benefits claim systems, which were based on really old technology, these things are just falling over left and right, because they were designed for 1,000 people a week to apply for unemployment, not 50,000 people per week to apply for unemployment. And so there were a lot of disruptions there that caused a lot of companies to go back and say, okay, what are we going to do going forward? And they may not have made a decision to do things differently, but it sparked a conversation. It's been a catalyst for these types of conversations about how do we create more adaptable systems? How do we maybe modernize some of these older systems that we're having to deal with that caused us a lot of problems when these events happened related to the pandemic, like the unemployment benefits claims? So I don't know. I think there are some percentage of companies that are out there that are doing something about it, but I think in almost every company, it's sparked a really, really good conversation about what are we going to do. And I think that's really the first step in getting to a world where we are better prepared and we are more adaptable for these things that happen, these black swan events or whatever you want to call them. At least having given them some thought, sparking the conversations, looking at the risks, looking at the risk benefit analysis, doing all that. I think that is much more prevalent today than it has been at any time in the last 20 or 30 years.
Are you seeing companies that call, again, when they call on a company like yours, particularly now, are they calling on a company like yours to help them fix kind of to the point you were making. Okay, look, we're struggling right now because our technology is not allowing us to do something that maybe has been impacted differently by the pandemic. Can Adaptigent come help us fix a problem? So that's one. But then at the same time, and I'm not trying to do business development for you, but this is just where my head was going. At the same time, are they going, okay, now that you all have come in and helped us fix this, which is not working right now, it's got our, we're scratching our heads. What else could we do to head things off? And the reason I'm asking this, Alex, is, again, I know that from a individual human standpoint, if I've got a cut or a bruise or I got a condition or whatever, I'm most worried about what's hurting me now. And then when that gets remedied to some degree, I'm then in a position psychologically, I'm like, oh, well, as long as I feel good now, I can look about things that might improve my health later or might put me in a better position. Are you seeing that kind of thing, or are you seeing more of just help us, we're struggling because of, if you will, pandemic-related pressures?
Yeah, no, I mean, we see a bit of both. I think what we saw early on in the pandemic was a bit of paralysis. People didn't know what to do. People didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, I remember when we at Adaptigent, we have our headquarters in Atlanta and we have an office, and, we decided, okay, we're going to work remotely. And we said at the time, all right, we're going to try this for 2 or 3 weeks. We think this thing's going to be over with maybe in 3 weeks or so. And then we're all going to come back into the office. We even set a date to come back in the office. And it's laughable now, right? You look back on it and you chuckle.
The dates were great, right? It was 3 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. Yes, right. Exactly.
Yeah. And so, you look at this sort of thing. And so I think a lot of people they had no idea what was going to happen. And then bad things started happening. And I think a lot of companies were in a bit of a paralysis mode. They really didn't know what to do. They didn't know the extent that this thing was going to reach. And they didn't know who to believe. And so that was kind of the first wave of this. The second wave of it was, oh my goodness, we have to do something right this second. And you saw this not just in companies, but you saw it in people's individual lives. You saw it in schools and higher education. They had to figure out how to do remote learning. They had to figure out how to test students for COVID. So I think there was this period of sort of disbelief in the beginning, then some paralysis, not knowing what was going to happen. Then there was this everything's on fire mode. We've got to go figure this out. And I think this year, maybe towards the latter part of this year, what we started to see is a turn to the companies that we work with being much more proactive. Now they've kind of gotten past the everything's on fire. I'm in pure reaction mode. I think now they're looking at it saying, okay, this can't happen again. We have to figure out some strategies for becoming more adaptable as a company. So it's gone through waves. And I think there's still companies out there. I mean, some companies have done great during this pandemic. I mean, everybody thinks it's a universal thing that's affected every business. Some companies have done fantastically.
Like if you're Zoom,
in this environment.
Like Zoom?
Yeah, if you're Zoom, this was the best thing that ever happened to your company,
well,
right?
Sure. Okay, I'm going to just totally pivot on this, and I know we were talking about. What I have not had a chance to ask anybody this question, particularly someone with a doctorate and is in this thing. What I don't know the company. I don't know the company well enough. What's going through their heads? Like what happened? I don't know if you know them intimately as a company, but like, what's your thought about Zoom and the road that they took over the last 2 years?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was really interesting. I mean, I think they were able to capitalize on this work from home trend, and they grew very rapidly. And I think when you grow very rapidly, that causes challenges. And so there were a lot of security related issues that they were having to deal with. And I mean, ultimately, I think it worked out well for a lot of these companies like Zoom or GoToMeeting or whomever, WebEx. Their businesses really took off, but even they were unprepared for the level and the rapidity of the growth that they experienced, right? This stuff went from 0 to 60 overnight, almost. And so I think they then looked at it and said, wow, a lot of the systems that we depend upon are not only are they not adaptable enough, they're not scalable enough. And I think what that's done for a lot of organizations is it's driven them to cloud computing, where they can get this on-demand capacity increase so that they're not dependent on just the systems in their own four walls. They're not saying, well, I've only got this one data center and it's tapped out. They can take advantage of scalable technologies out there in the cloud. But then they found out, oh man, this is tough though, because I've still got all this stuff that's on premise. I still have these systems that run my business. How do I make them talk to the cloud so that I get this business continuity that I'm looking for? And so we saw a lot of that happening, and we're still seeing it happening. There's a big push to move things to the cloud, whether it's, Amazon or Azure or whatever, these big public cloud providers. There's been a big move to move a lot of things to the cloud. But one of the inhibitors to doing that is, oh man, I've got all this stuff that's been here for 30 or 40 years. How do I get it to talk to the stuff that I'm now putting into the cloud to get this flexible, adaptable capacity? And that's been a big challenge for a lot of our customers.
But is that something that, is that something that, again, Zoom but particularly Zoom. I was thinking about the WebExes and the Microsoft Teams, and they're coming from a larger base. But I guess one thing I'm wondering with your customers, is this something where Adaptigent is able to sort of go in and say, hey, it's going to be all right. Like we can help you. We can help you even though you're experiencing something that maybe paralyzes you. Almost as if like the role that Adaptigent's solutions play are maybe simpler than the companies could envision. Because I know we've talked about this earlier shows about, sort of abstraction layers versus going in and pulling out an entire hardware and then replacing it with a brand new system.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are looking for that simplicity because, we have a no-code platform, which means you can go out and build very sophisticated workflows and integrations and process automations without writing code. And I think that there's been a big trend on this over the last 5 years, and I think the pandemic and a lot of the supply chain issues they've really underscored this idea that I don't want to have to go get an army of programmers involved when I need to go make changes to things quickly. I want to be able to do them myself. I want to be able to control my own destiny in that regard. And so I think a lot of companies have said, I need to simplify my environment. I need to move towards technologies that are easier to change, where I don't have to go writing a lot of code to do it. And that ultimately improves their level of adaptability because now I can make changes in minutes rather than making changes that will take weeks. So I think that's a part of a broader trend is we've got to simplify this stuff because the hardest part about adapting to these big events, these pandemics or supply chain issues or whatever, one of the hardest things is that technology foundation. And these technology foundations work great in sort of a steady state model, and that's what they're optimized for. But when the world changes quickly, a lot of times they fall apart very, very quickly. And so that's the trend that we're seeing is people really looking at this saying, I've got to simplify these environments. I've got to simplify the way I do my business. I've got to simplify some of my processes, and I've got to simplify the technology that underpins my business that lets me operate on a day-to-day basis. And if I don't do that, the next time we have a big event happen, a Black Swan event or whatever, I'm going to be in the same situation. So those conversations are happening now. People are really taking this very seriously, and it's been a big forcing function for a lot of companies to go back and reevaluate where they're at. And so that's part of where we're playing with these guys is to sit down with them and show them there is a better way. There's a way to make this significantly more adaptable without spending a massive amount of money on it. Because to simplify systems that have been in place for 30 or 40 or 50 years, that can run in for big companies to eliminate those systems or replace them. That can run into the tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars. So there's better ways of doing it that will kind of get you where you want to get from an adaptability standpoint without having to go spend hundreds of millions of dollars doing it.
It's interesting, and I wanted to wrap on this idea. So we talk about a lot of times as a psychologist, we're telling people, in unprecedented times, in times of uncertainty, when you are feeling scared, when you are feeling like I'm not sure exactly what to do, before, obviously, if you get paralyzed, that's not good. Go talk to somebody, right? Get some consultation. I'm not just talking about mental health, but like check in with somebody to almost give you a reality check. And what you just described for us sort of sounds like one of the roles that Adaptigent actually plays. It's like, hey, here's the reality. Here's where you're at. Here's what you can do. And a lot of times when you go do that, you not only feel better, but you make much more rational decisions. So you know what? I'm really glad Adaptigent is there, because you and your team are serving as psychologists for the rest of the business world.
I don't think anybody's ever described us that way, but yeah, I mean, I think there's some element of that, right? There's some element of, when people get paralyzed and companies kind of, they really don't know what to do. I mean, one of the important things that you have to do, and this is true, I think, of any company, is when you're in a world where you have less and less control of what's happening, you really have to focus your efforts on what can I control. It's really easy to get overwhelmed by all the change that happens in the world, and it's really easy to say, well, I can't control anything. One of the techniques that we use for that, and one of the things we work with our customers on, is, okay, don't try to solve the whole problem here. Let's focus on what is within your control, and let's go out and improve that. And then ultimately that gives you the foundation to go out and expand those efforts to everything that you can control, and then prepare yourself for events that you can't control, because there will always be those events in your life, whether you're a person or a company or anything else. There's always going to be events in your life that are beyond your control. What you have to do is focus on what you can control.
Good stuff, Alex. Good stuff. All right, everybody, that's it. We are out of time for today's segment of Adapt or Perish. But you need to do is stay tuned to Tony Kurre Radio. Alex and I will be back for another session to help you and your company adapt so that you don't perish.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.